today I'm with Dr. Raichlen from the University of Southern California, and we're going to talk about your most recent publication titled The Association of Physical Activity with Incidence of Dementia is Attenuated by Air Pollution. So today I basically just wanted you to talk to an audience that loves exercise physiology, to other researchers about this paper. So maybe we can start with a little bit of background on this particular study.
Sure. Yeah. So this study, it's actually part of a series of studies that we've done looking at the effects of air pollution on dementia, as well as the effects of physical activity or associations of physical activity with dementia risk and with other brain-related risk factors. And we became interested in the topic because as a researcher interested in the benefits of physical activity and finding ways to enhance the benefits of physical activity for health, I started to think more about, well, what are the environmental interactions that may actually kind of get in the way of those benefits? And so living in Southern California, air pollution is an omnipresent concern. And so we started to look at the different ways that air pollution might interact with physical activity to affect brain health. So we published, as I said, a series of papers. The latest one, as we're talking about here, published in MSSE, is a study using the UK Biobank, which is a very large health-related database from the UK. And we were able to look at associations between physical activity and incident dementia in a pretty large population. This is over 35,000 people that have accelerometer-derived physical activity variables. Look at those associations between physical activity and incident dementia, and then see whether those associations are modified in some way by exposure to air pollution.
So there's a lot of research that physical activity is great for mental health and other cognitive disorders, right? And
Correct.
There's also a lot of research that pollution is not.
Correct.
So I think that you looking at that link, between the three variables, it's something very unique that people have not done before, to my knowledge.
Yeah, people, for brain health, yes, this is the first to our knowledge of where we've looked at dementia risk in this way. And one of the reasons it's important, as you said, physical activity is associated with a lot of brain benefits, including reduced risk of developing dementia. Pollution is associated with increased risk of developing dementia. And when you're physically active and exercising, one of the things that happens is that we increase our respiration rates. And so there is some theoretical foundation to looking at these interactions, because as you exercise, you're going to be breathing in more pollution, especially, one of the types of pollution we're interested in are very small particulate matter, PM 2.5. And these particles go deep into your lungs, and the greater your respiration rate, the more of that you're going to breathe in. So that's sort of the grounding for our hypothesis that there might be some interaction between physical activity and air pollution exposure.
Yeah, so I don't want to give out any spoilers because we want everyone to go ahead and go read the paper. But after reading the paper, I was not very optimistic, I guess.
Well, it's not as bad as it could have been. I'll say that. I think we found that that exposure to air pollution attenuated the benefits of physical activity for dementia risk. And so at the highest air pollution exposures, we didn't find a beneficial association between activity and dementia risk, whereas at lower pollution exposures, we did find a beneficial association between physical activity and dementia. But what we didn't find is an exacerbation. So, part of, if there is a good news take home, it's that we didn't see any evidence that exercise and air pollution exposure interact to exacerbate the effects of air pollution on the brain. So, that's a minor good news.
Yeah. So I'm curious, do you have on the works maybe a follow-up to this study where you're looking at some other variables, for example?
In terms of pollution risk or?
Yeah, so I guess my question is, which questions do you have now after, and I know, as researchers, questions never end,
Right.
but maybe something interesting that you could share with us
Well,
today.
I mean, yeah, I mean, we're interested in kind of drilling down a little bit deeper into what is it about these interactions between physical activity and air pollution alter dementia risk. We found some evidence looking at brain structure. We found some brain structural effects. So we found, for example, that physical activity in general reduces the volume of white matter hyperintensities, which are associated with risk of dementia and stroke down the line. And we found a similar kind of attenuation of those benefits with exposure to air pollution. And so we're very interested in continuing to look at brain structural effects to try to figure out exactly what is it about brain structural changes that may kind of affect dementia risk. And then using this data set, there are longitudinal data being collected currently. So more brain scans and continued following of this really large cohort. And so with increased power, we might see some different effects and different associations. So we'll keep kind of investigating as more data accrue in this population.
Why did you choose, or why looking at dementia instead of, I mean, maybe that's the data that you got, but I'm curious because I'm also doing a PhD in neuroscience. And so most of the research that I've seen, it's mostly, Parkinson's disease, Alzheimer's disease, not so much dementia.
Well, yeah. So, I mean, Alzheimer's disease is a kind of a specific subtype of dementia. The reason we chose dementia in this particular analysis is mainly a power issue that we do. The way that we are assessing outcomes is from hospital records that are linked to the physical activity and air pollution exposure variables. And because we're in a subset of the big UK Biobank study where we have accelerometer data, there just aren't enough Alzheimer's cases yet to run a more complete study on that outcome. As time goes on and more people that are part of that population develop Alzheimer's disease or even other types of dementia like frontotemporal dementia, then we would have more power to actually look at those specific subtypes. But for now, we wanted to work in a study where we could really have enough power to detect these associations. So all-cause dementia was our best bet. But as I said, we're continuing to work in this data set. As more cases are accrue, we'll be able to do more detailed studies on specific types of dementia. But we're interested in general in dementia risk in my lab and in the lab of my collaborators because, again, this has been a really amazing area of research over the last couple of decades, showing that physical activity has all these benefits. And so our interest is, what else can we do to either sort of enhance those benefits, or, as we did in this study, look at what environmental variables do we need to be careful about that might diminish those benefits. So kind of looking at how do we take the benefits of exercise to the next step. We all know exercise is good for you.
Right.
Those of us in this research area, we all know exercise is good for your brain, but what else can we do, right? That's sort of the next steps in this research area.
So yeah, maybe some applicable advice for people who like to train outdoors or commute right to work.
For sure. Well, I'll give two kind of, I think, take home messages. One is for the research community and one is for everybody. For the research community, what this work suggests, at least in epidemiology and physical activity epidemiology, is that there are probably environmental variables as we look at multi-center studies or really large epidemiological data sets. There are environmental variables that are likely interacting with physical activity in ways that may alter the effects of physical activity on some outcome or the association between physical activity and some outcome. And so it may be important as we do these big epi studies or large multi-center trials to take into account the kinds of environments that subjects or participants are in when they're engaging in these different exposures. That's the research community. For everyone, I think there are things that obviously we can do as individuals. You can look at pollution levels in your community. There's lots of information available on the web or on apps on your phone, and you can kind of gauge pollution levels and make better decisions about when to exercise or where to exercise. I mean, what we're finding, the key pollutants that we found associations with were PM 2.5, so fine, very small particulate matter, and then PM 2.5 absorbance, which is a proxy for black carbon. It's something that comes from combustion engines. And so exercising near traffic, near automobile traffic is probably something that we should all be avoiding as much as possible. I think, to me, the biggest take-home message is for all of us as a community and a community of researchers and everybody else, which is that it's our responsibility to clean up and protect the air in our communities, because not everyone has the opportunity to avoid physical activity in polluted environments. People engage in physical activity for their work. People live in areas where if they want to exercise, there's just no way around exercising in a polluted environment. And so we need to take this on as a research community and a community at large to clean up the air so that everyone can get the brain benefits of exercise.
Wow. Yeah. This is so great. Thank you so much. I don't want to keep you longer. I know I said 15 minutes.
Oh, it's my pleasure. No, I
and
appreciate you
yeah,
contacting me.
yeah, for sure. And yeah, and I think this is such an interesting point. I am doing research right now and my intervention study. So I live in Arizona. So, during the summer, it's impossible to do outdoors.
Yes.
But in my study, we do indoors when possible and outdoors when possible. And this, I never thought about how the heat might be affecting, but not really like pollution. So it's very interesting.
It's something to think about. What we still don't know for some of, especially in intervention studies, when we're looking at intermediate outcomes, for the brain related intervention studies, oftentimes the outcomes are either a structural variable or a cognitive outcome. And, we don't know the size of the effect or the magnitude of the effect of these interactions. So we don't know whether these interactions are going to play a big role in kind of intervention study outcomes. But certainly in the epi data, when we look at the big data sets that are looking like across the US, I wouldn't be surprised if you take into account pollution exposures, if that might affect your relationships in some way.
Yeah, and just super quickly, just because I was wondering about the physical activity part of the study. So you had accelerometers worn on the wrist, but what type of data do you collect? Do you collect like daily data from the participants? Do you have access to all of that, or is it more like like a weekly average?
So for this analysis, we used a summary available that is average daily acceleration across their wear time. So most of the participants wore the accelerometers for about a week, but that varied a little bit, but it's average daily acceleration. So it's a very, general kind of look at physical activity. It's not looking at like time spent in certain physical activity intensities. It's just a very overall average measure of how active someone is or was.
Okay, perfect. Well, those were all my questions, but definitely, I don't know if you have a last message of why people should drop whatever they are doing right now and just go read this paper.
Well, I mean, I think I'm very thankful that we have the opportunity to kind of promote this kind of research, because I think as we're living in a world where the climate is constantly changing now. And as climate change keeps ramping up, that has negative impacts on pollution exposure around the world. And I think these kinds of studies are really important because they help us identify areas where people are going to be negatively impacted by the environment that they don't always choose to live in. And we have disparities in pollution exposure around the world and in the US, right? Even within cities like Los Angeles, there are disparities in pollution exposure. And then around the world, there are disparities, and people don't always get a choice in where they live. And so, I hope that all of us as a research community, we can take these kinds of studies and get motivated to keep doing them and to find ways to let our research affect policy so that we can all really have a cleaner environment to exercise in, because that's what we want to do, right? You want to go outside and exercise and be healthy, and you don't want to have to breathe in all this stuff.
Yeah, but no matter what, keep exercising, correct?
That's at this point, there's very little evidence across epidemiological studies that exposure to air pollution during exercise exacerbates health problems. There are some studies that show these kinds of attenuations. Just as we don't know at this point, but the studies that seem to show more consistent association seem to be brain-based studies. So stroke and dementia and brain structural effects. And it may be that the brain is just particularly vulnerable to these pollutants. And so physical activity in these environments may have a greater impact on brain health than on other aspects of physiology. But that's a future kind of set of research that needs to be done.
Perfect. Well, thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Yes, and I wish you all the best, and hopefully we'll see more of your research in MSSC.
I hope so. Thank you much.
Thank you so much. Have a nice day.
You too. Take care.
Bye.
Bye.